Kamala. I know that the media has been working nonstop to portray you as the pro-black candidate. They even set you up quite nicely with those BS reparations questions, and you even handled yourself, for the most part, quite well with those BS reparations answers, to the point where some people even believe that Kamala Harris is actually going to give black people a damn thing. She's not. So they've been portraying you as the black candidate. And they've also been simultaneously saying Bernie Sanders has a black problem. Now, Bernie's a 77-year-old white guy, so, I mean, he has as much of a quote-unquote black problem as any other 77-year-old white guy who isn't black. But as far as this electoral politics is concerned, Bernie seems to have the opposite of a black problem. Because according to this article by The Intercept, and this is written by Ryan Grimm, shout out to Ryan Grimm, I follow him on Twitter. I think we follow each other, actually. He's a brilliant writer, does some great work. And I'm gonna post this in the description. I like The Intercept, but also, y'all need to share this. Y'all need to share this wherever you can. If people gonna be like, that's not true. March 6th, 2019. Bernie Sanders, not 2018, it's not 2017, it's ain't 2016. March 6th, 2019. I want to be very clear about that. Gonna be a lot of arguments that come after this article goes viral. This just dropped today, about 4 hours ago. Bernie Sanders is beating Kamala Harris 2-1 amongst black Democratic primary voters. New poll finds. Now, the article says that 3 weeks after launching his presidential campaign, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders is leading all other announced candidates in support from black voters. A new poll finds. The only potential candidate who polled better with African Americans than Sanders, according to the poll Morning Consult, is former President Joe Biden, who has not announced his campaign. Now, once again, let me go ahead and clarify why it even appears that he is leading in the polls amongst black voters, or any voters for that matter. Specifically as it pertains to black voters, there are a lot of black people who are still disillusioned about the reality of the Obama experience. However, that disillusion has worked to the benefit of Joe Biden. Now, the reason that people, for some reason, are okay or attracted to Joe Biden is because they associate him with Barack Obama. And they believe that Joe Biden will actually govern in the way they think Barack Obama did, that he'll behave as dignified the same way Barack Obama and his family did. Now, there's not really any evidence to say that would happen. Well, actually, no, there's a lot of evidence to say that he will probably be worse than Barack Obama for black people, but that's a different discussion. But that's the only reason that he would lead. But I think as things unfold, he would lose that vote in a quick, fast, and a hurry. And I honestly think that that's part of the reason why Joe Biden has actually kind of like stayed out of the race, because he's on a high right now. And he is indeed riding a high, a very similar high to what Kamala Harris was riding up until this point. But this is a different era in political or presidential elections, and elections in general, but specifically presidential elections, are a different animal. It will wear you down. The truth about you, whether you like it or not, will come out. And this is probably the explanation for this poll. Now, the article goes on to say that despite a persistent notion that his supporters are disproportionately white male bros, which no poll ever showed that, no exit polls ever showed that, the new survey suggests that Sanders is actually slightly more popular amongst black Democratic voters than white ones, indicating that the narrative that developed during the 2016 campaign may no longer hold, if, in fact, it ever did. Sanders' support among black voters is at 28%. It puts him in second place among that demographic behind Biden, who's at 32%. But he actually trails to Biden amongst white voters, 31% to 25%. There appears to be a strong class element at play in the finding as well. Now, that same poll found that the demographics Sanders is least popular with, at 19 and 17%, respectively, are Democrats who make more than $100,000 a year, surprise, surprise, and Democrats who have postgraduate degrees. Two qualities that typically, if not always, overlap because of structural wealth and income gaps. The population is, unsurprisingly, heavily white. Now, Sanders, meanwhile, receives his strongest support from those making less than $50,000, a group that is, for some reason, for the same reasons, much more diverse. That poll found that 30% of those with the lowest incomes back Bernie Sanders. Now, Senator Kamala Harris, meanwhile, has half as much support, 14% amongst black voters, as Sanders does, according to supplementary polling data provided to The Intercept by Morning Consult. The findings are drawn from a sample size of 2,587 likely Democratic voters who are black. And Cory Booker, of course, is at about 6%. 2,587 voters is a hell of a sample size. That's a pretty damn good sample size. Yeah. About that Bernie bro narrative, don't know if it's going to hold anymore. I mean, I don't think that it really ever did. I think that it only caught fire on Twitter amongst the establishment and in like CNN, MSNBC realms, but on YouTube, in the progressive circles, in the circles of actual active voters, it never caught fire. Nobody believed that. I've always said Bernie is actually more unpopular with white people than he is with minorities. Minorities love Bernie Sanders. They love him. Black people that I know, that I've met, when they found out about him, they loved him. They may have issues with one thing or another, like his answers for reparations, for example, but that doesn't mean that, but that's new. That's a new phenomena. They never even question him on reparations before. There was one other time he was questioned. That was like 3-4 years ago, but black people didn't know who he was, so they never thought to go back to that. But other than that, the only black people who didn't quote unquote like him or love him or didn't like him or didn't love him, they just didn't know who he was. So that narrative came out that black people didn't like him because he was he was cheated in Super Tuesday. He was being kept out of reach from black leadership in various states so that narrative could persist. However, once people found out about him, they regretted not being able to vote for him. Now, once again, I've covered this in a different video where I was explaining that the media, the establishment media, is who they need to own up to a lot of that blame, because they knew that Bernie was better for minorities, that he was better for the marginalized, that he was better for the working class. And minorities, black people specifically, and the marginalized in general, tend to fall into the working class category. So why would you then keep him away from us? Why would you keep him from black people, pretend that Hillary was for black people, and then simultaneously claim that black people don't like Bernie? It's because he never tried to reach out to us, and he never tried to listen to us, and he never tried to speak to our issues. When once again, and you're gonna hear me say this over and over and over again, I was there. I was there when he spoke about the prison industrial complex. I was there when he basically told a group full of old white people, if you don't believe in systemic racism, you're an idiot. It's here. It's real. I will remember a time when bringing up race was political suicide. I remember a time when nobody in the Democratic Party cared and even pretended to care enough to bring up black issues. But now they do because Bernie made it popular to talk about, racial inequity and inequality. But they don't want to talk about that. I'm not saying that Bernie's the first to have ever done it, but I'm saying that Bernie in modern political history has popularized it. So this poll demonstrates that, for one, Kamala Harris, dog, you never had to mention the fact that you were black and you would have had a better chance getting elected by black people. But now you're going into Super Tuesday with the disadvantage 2-1, 2,587 black voters polled. That's a pretty damn good sample size. 2-1. And that's only because you haven't stood on a debate stage with Bernie Sanders. Imagine what it's going to look like after that. And I don't even know if Joe Biden's going to enter the race, but once he enters the race, Bernie has to just bring up the crime bill and how unapologetic Joe Biden was and is. All you have to do is show 5 clips of Joe Biden insulting the working class people, insulting millennials, all his rhetoric from the past, and Joe is out of the race. People do not know about Joe Biden's history. There's a reason that he's ran for president twice and has failed to even come close to winning. He is riding Obama's popularity, and part of him knows that, if not all of him. And he knows that the moment he announces, he's getting shredded. But for Kamala, she's suffering bleeding from self-inflicted wounds. Why did you make the Tupac comment? Why did you make the marijuana comment? Why do you talk about civil rights activism when you were responsible for putting more black men in jail than anybody else in California's history? If you'd never made your campaign about being black, rather than doing whatever you can for everybody. Now, I'm not saying black people don't deserve specific attention, because we do. Our communities have been treated differently, and so we deserve a very specific type of attention. But you can still, when you're president, you do run for everybody, and you base your advocacy and your policies off of the specific needs of the community as a whole and the diverse needs of communities themselves. We treat Japanese Americans like Americans, but we also gave them reparations for what we did during World War II because it needed to be addressed. Things like that. You can be the president of everybody and still take care of specific communities no matter what race you are. But Kamala made it seem as if she's running for black people. Now, she backtracked those statements. I'm going to do a video about that. Like, she backtracked running for black people in an interview with a black woman. But that's how she's portrayed herself. She talks about criminal justice reform, but not getting rid of the prison industrial complex. Things like this, black people listen to. When you claim to be for us, you better be all the way for us, or you're going to get your ass handed to you. Bernie is not perfect in any way, shape, or form. But as far as being an ally to the black community, I don't expect perfection, but I do expect a legitimate effort. And one of the things that the black community has always requested is that not necessarily that you have to fight for us. We appreciate it, but you don't have to fight for us. Not even necessarily that you have to get the answer right every single time, because we're not naive. We know there's a lot of conditioning that has gone into the racism in this country, a lot of isolationism, not necessarily by choice, like economic segregation that ultimately led to racial segregation with, even after the Jim Crow era. We understand it. So we know we have to do some reteaching that has to be done. We get that. But all we ask is to bring attention to these issues and acknowledge them as real. And if that is all Bernie Sanders, and not work against us while we're trying to find this progress, And if that's all Bernie Sanders did in 2016, I would still be happier with him than 98% of the other candidates who up until recently, even refused to bring up Black issues. And in some cases, capitalized, like Bill Clinton, off of our plight, enriched themselves off of our plight. Bill Clinton, Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, Lyndon B. Johnson, even bringing attention, acknowledging what has happened is so important. And people know that. We don't ask, we're not looking to have our hands held. We're pretty good at politically organizing. And we're much more astute politically than most people believe. And the mainstream knew this, which is why they portrayed Bernie Sanders as this anti-Black person that comes straight out of the Tom Perez handbook. The Humanist talked about it, and I had forgot about it until he brought it up. Mike Figueredo, shout out to him. Where Tom Perez, it was found out in an email, and then there was an article written about it. Tom Perez said we need to portray Bernie Sanders as the white candidate, as in the anti-Black candidate. That's what this reparations conversation is about. So be careful when you are attacking an ally, or when you're observing this political arena and all these opponents, and you got to be careful, because you never know when you may be playing into the hands of someone who is actually anti-Black. But I'm glad to know that the people are waking up, and some of these legitimate posters are actually telling the truth. Thank you for watching that segment of Mi Casa es Su Casa. Help us reach our goal of 500 patrons. You can do so by donating as little as $1 by clicking on the Patreon link in the description below. Don't forget, join us on Roku and JustNForm. You can follow us on Twitter and Facebook as well. And remember, more than anything else, find your balance. Peace.